welcome to Gardening at 58 North. In this video I'd like to give you guys a tour of the polytunnel and the greenhouse at my parents' garden. Now I have been wanting to do an update on this for a long time, but unfortunately what's been happening is either been really warm and sunny, so I come in here and it's too hot and the camera steams up, or it's been raining like it is today and it's cool enough but the rains are so heavy you can't hear anything on the microphone. Today is light drizzle though, it's not too bad. I was wanting to come in here first thing in the morning or last thing at night when it was a bit cooler, but unfortunately now in midsummer in this far north, sunrise is at 4 in the morning and sunset is at 10, so it's quite difficult to get any filming done. So that's why it's been a bit of a delay for this update, but it's now early June, so it's I'm able to give you a bit of an update as everything's coming along. So as you can see, there's a huge amount of growth. This is probably when everything's going to look their healthiest and at their happiest. The reason for this is I find with a lot of greenhouse plants and most vegetable plants in general, to be honest, is when at the beginning of the year they grow really strong, really well, got good light levels, and the temperature's up just high enough now that it's warm enough for them as well. And there's not many pests because they can grow faster than the pests can reproduce. But then as soon as the midsummer comes, they start putting energy into their fruit, then the pests and diseases start to build up and then the plants look a bit less healthy and they start going downhill, although that's also the time when you get the good crops. So at the moment this is probably the healthiest everything's going to look. From now on there'll be more nutrient deficiencies showing up, more pests and diseases, but at least everything's looking good and we are getting a few crops already. So I'll also give you a quick update on what has been happening with the weather. It's been quite frustrating this year. We seem to be getting extreme weathers, whereas normally in Scotland, because we're surrounded by sea and we're so far north, we don't get too many extremes. The only extremes we tend to get is strong winds or cold in midsummer, and we've had all of them as usual. We've had strong winds, but that doesn't affect the polytunnel. We've had very low temperatures, so the last week or so we've only had the maximums about 10 or 12 degrees during the day, about 8 degrees at night, occasionally down to 6 degrees. So it's been really quite cold. The polytunnel's been okay though. We had some really warm, hot, sunny weather, so it was around 20 to 24 degrees most days. A week before last week, that got it really hot in the polytunnel. We had to open the doors. It was getting up to 40 degrees, and that stored a lot of heat in the thermal heat store, and so I think that's really helped with the cold spell we had. And everything was growing like absolutely crazy because it was so warm, so sunny. And the last week or so everything slowed down, but it's going to start picking up again because this week we're getting back up to 18 degrees or so. So be slightly better weather, slightly sunnier weather as well, which is what this really needs. So I'll give you a quick tour. It's also a tale of two places really, because the polytunnel has done really well, the greenhouse has done terribly, and I'll show you what's happened there at the end of this video. But I'll start off on a positive note, show you the polytunnel and the amazing growth we've had. So the first plant I'd like to show you here is my biggest and healthiest courgette plant. As you can see, it's absolutely enormous. For me to get one this big in Scotland at this time of year is quite unusual. I've just been really lucky with getting it going early in the year and then not having any hard frosts, and having it in this polytunnel with a thermal store has helped a lot as well. So we've already probably had about 5 courgettes off this. It's a huge plant. It keeps throwing off new courgettes all the time. You can see here we've got this lovely one just starting to form there. There's loads of other ones coming. It's also got a second sprout that's come out from the bottom, so it's starting to crop courgettes at the bottom there as well. But it has got a bit bigger than I was anticipating, so it's unfortunately taken over the eggplant or the aubergine at the back. So I was hoping that the aubergine would grow taller than this, and I knew it might swamp it out a bit, but I didn't think the eggplant would do so badly. It's not really grown at all since I planted it there. The ones at my house are looking really big now. They're absolutely huge and they're actually starting to flower and get crops. This one, unfortunately, it hasn't barely grown at all. It's just sat there, and to be honest, now it's so swamped I don't think it will do much at all. But I'll keep it there, I'll see how it does. The courgette will probably go over before the end of summer, so this might get some more space by then. So far I've just been pushing the leaves either side, keeping it less smothered, but I might have to start removing leaves at some point. We also had a crop under here of radishes. They've all been harvested pretty much, so it was good to get 2 crops, although I was taken aback by how fast the courgette grew. So it did smother some of the radishes before they were ready, but you can see there's a couple at the bottom there left, but we did get a good harvest and it's just a few stragglers left at the moment. So coming around here, I've got a few bedding plants that are ready for the house. I'm just trying to get them up to a decent size quickly, so that's why they're here in the polytunnel. With the cold weather we've been having, they'll be getting up to a good size here. If I had them outside, they'll be a bit slow. Also got my one of my dahlias down there, and I've got the hanging baskets with the tumbling tomatoes. There's 4 of them in total. A couple of the strings have started to snap, so I've moved 2 of them down. You can see the other one is down here, and I'll need to get some stronger twine or rope even to string them up if I still want them to be tumbling. At the back I've also got my mother's sweet peas as well. Harvesting quite a few flowers from them. I think she's probably getting 2 or 3 stems of flowers every day. It's slow at the moment, but midsummer she'll probably be getting bunches of flowers every day. Coming along, we've got the last of our lettuce. This is where I'm going to be planting more sweet peppers and a couple of chilies as well. The lettuce is getting too hot for the lettuce now, so it's going to be going to flower. So we're just harvesting the last of that. Same with the coriander here. It's just starting to go to seed, so harvest a bit more coriander, the remaining lettuce, and then this will be planted up with sweet peppers. So over here we've got the sweet corn, which has done really well this year. My only worry is that it might get too tall. I'm hoping this variety is a little bit shorter than some of the other ones we've had in the past. I put them in the middle of the polytunnel to give them the most amount of height, so that this is in the highest point of the polytunnel. Because what tends to happen is they grow really tall, up to about 10-12 feet or so, 3 meters. And what happens is the pollen producing sections on the top of the plants, which are these here, they get really wet, the pollen gets clumpy, and then it doesn't fall and pollinate the cobs, and then we don't get a great harvest. But this year it's looking quite good. They are really big lost plants, but they're already starting to form the pollen producing male parts, and they're already starting to ear up on the bottom as well. You can see here we've already got some side shoots, so these should be producing ears soon. Some of these might be tillers, which are like secondary plants that come up, but this one looks quite high up, so this should hopefully be an ear. So we'll see. There should be some tassels coming out soon, and that will be for the female parts to get pollinated. So hopefully we don't get too much more vertical growth, but certainly loads of leaves at the moment. Really big healthy plants, doing very well. I've been giving them lots of high nitrogen feed to keep them growing quite strongly, and that's really seemed to have benefited them. I've also mulched a lot of the polytunnel this year with straw. The idea of that is to keep the weeds down, but also it's to keep the humidity down, because quite often we get humidity problems in here. We get a lot of mold and botrytis starting to grow in the plants. Or with plants like the sweet corn, which are wind pollinated with the pollen gets too wet because it's too humid, and then the pollen can't fall onto the female flowers, and then we don't get good pollination. So that should help with the humidity, but one of the biggest problems with humidity is all the leaves from the plants. They're going to be pumping out loads of water vapor, keeping it really humid, so it's still going to be a very humid environment, but at least it can help a little bit with the straw. And down the bottom here you can see they're already sending out their secondary roots on the sweet corn. These are just kind of big structural roots. They grow later in the year as they mature. They give it extra stability, and they also grow them from slightly higher up. So you can see here there's some starting to grow as well. And underneath I've planted it with basil. You'll see there's loads of basil all over the place. I've planted lots underneath these tomato plants as well, and in between the aubergines over there. So we're able to harvest lots of basil. This is actually all from one plant. I've just been taking lots and lots of different cuttings and reproducing them like I did on that video that I did previously. So I've got loads of basil plants from just one plant. And also underneath I'm going to be growing the butternut squash, which I've mentioned in a previous video. They're going to be growing underneath all the plants on the sides and in the middle bed. This one here is the biggest so far. You can see it's growing really quite far. It's probably about 2 meters in length. Maybe a bit more, actually getting close to 3 meters. There's three main vines I'm training on it, one down the middle and 2 just kind of either side. The other one's a bit further back. If I zoom in, you should hopefully be able to see one just at the end down there. And the idea with them is once everything else is a bit higher up and we've removed some of the lower leaves on the tomatoes, they're going to cover the ground level and they're going to produce a crop later on in the season. So coming along here, these are the tomatoes which are at the furthest ahead. These were planted first, and so they were much further ahead than the other tomato plants. These are San Marzano 2 tomatoes, which give nice big plum tomatoes, really good for sauces. These have actually been a lot more congested than I thought. I should have thought about it. The plum and the beefsteak tomatoes tend to be bushier, leafier plants, and they smother other plants more easily. So I did actually underplant this with basil and spring onion, and with the idea of getting a double cropping, but unfortunately they've kind of smothered everything. I'm going to still get some though, so I've found it hard to weed in here now because it's so congested, but you can see there are a few basil plants coming up. These were just sown as seedlings, sown as seeds, So you can see there's a few starting to come up, but generally they're starting to get smothered out, so I don't think we'll get a great crop of that. But the spring onions on the edge are doing quite well. I've already eaten a couple. You can see they're coming up there, and they've got their nice little bulbs starting to form as well. So we can start harvesting these spring onions. There's loads all along the edge. It can be a bit difficult weeding because they look very much like the grass that grows in here, so I need to be careful to take out the grass and not the spring onions by accident. But they're doing okay, even though it looks quite congested. We are starting to get a decent crop of spring onions, and there's about 3 metre line of them coming right along, so they're doing quite well. See quite a few more down here. Now the other unexpected crop we've got out of this bed is actually coriander. I didn't sow any in here this year, but there was some sown in this bed last summer. It didn't germinate very well, but it's decided to germinate this year. So around this bed we just got random coriander plants coming up. So that's another nice crop just to be getting out of here. And at the end here we've got the cobra beans. They really struggled to get going. I think it was the cold weather at the beginning of the year, but as soon as we had their heat wave about 2 weeks ago, they put on some strong growth, and they've been growing quite well ever since. They've slowed down a bit this week with the cooler weather, but they're still doing pretty well. We've had a couple of cobra beans, but not too many yet. These are a type of French bean. You can see the size of the leaves though, absolutely massive, so they're obviously getting a lot of feed and nutrients from down in the soil. So at the end of the polytunnel here in the middle, we've got a section which has got mainly cucumbers and courgettes. Also a couple of underplanted basil. There's basically basil planted all over the place, underplanted, because basil can do quite well in the shadier spots, especially in midsummer. And the good thing with this polytunnel is we've got a diffuse polythene, so that means you can't see through it. What that does is instead of having strong shadows, the sun is diffused, so the light doesn't come from one spot where the sun is. The light is reflected off all this plastic. So even the areas which would normally be shaded underneath the plants is getting more light because the light is coming from a much more diffused area. So for example, there's never any shadows in this polytunnel. Just get slightly darker areas. And even when I look underneath the plants here, you can see there's a little bit darker, but it's still quite bright. So a lot of light gets underneath the foliage. So that's why we can underplant with things like basil, like down here, and they still grow quite well, even though normally it would be completely shadowed by the other plants. So we've got the courgette plant here. It's interesting, all these plants are supposed to be the same variety, but they're growing quite differently. I've had that with a lot of the plants this year. I don't know if there's been a problem with the seeds that I've got. Maybe the producer of the seeds hasn't been keeping them true to type. So for example, the San Marzano tomatoes, this one here seems to have grown like a dwarf. It's really bushy, lots of really thick leaves, and the spacing between the leaves is really short. And the other ones here, you can see the leaves are a bit more sparse and a bit more stretched out. So it's a bit weird that it's like that. Same with the courgettes. This one here doesn't seem to be having too many courgettes, doesn't seem to be flowering all that much, certainly with female flowers. It seems to be getting mainly male flowers. Not cropping too much. The one at the front there that I showed you previously, the main reason that one's so big and healthy is because it's got more space, so that's growing as it should do. But then the one that this one is partnered with on the other side is absolutely covered in courgettes and seems to be cropping really well at the moment. So this courgette on this side has had just the same nutrition pretty much as the other courgette, as it's growing in the same bed, same soil amendments and the same amount of spacing. But it's absolutely covered in courgettes here. This one's cropping really well, so I'm not sure why that is. There seems to be a bit of variation. Same with these tomatoes as well. These are supposed to be sun gold tomatoes, and most of them are growing like sun gold, with this kind of leaf shape, and with lots of flowers coming on quite long vines like this here. But this one at the end is quite unusual. The leaves are a lot smaller, you can see there. And instead of the fruit growing on long vines, it seems to be on really branched vines, so it's quite strange. I don't know again what's happening with the seed varieties there. And it's also the same with one of my beefsteak tomatoes over here. This variety is supposed to be a cordon variety, so it keeps growing forever. You just keep taking the side shoots off, it doesn't stop growth. But one of them has decided it's a bushed variety and it's stopped growth and just put on lots of flowers. So this is what they should look like, lots of new growth coming at the top, and just flowers coming out the side of the stem. Whereas this one here has decided to put on no more growth on the top and just put out loads of flowers on the top. So I'll see what this one does. I'm going to try and leave one of the lower side shoots to come up like this one here, see if that will replace the what's been lost on the top. But it's just a bit strange, this one's decided to grow a bit like a bush variety and not a cordon variety. And now the cucumbers were a bit slow to get going, but they've really seemed to have taken off now. It was probably just a bit cold for them, or maybe they were just getting a bit smothered by the courgette plants. But you can see they're climbing up quite nicely now. There's 4 plants in total. They're branching quite well also, and they're starting to climb up the structure, so there's plenty of space for them to continue growing, and they are going to completely cover this structure by the end of summer. They're really big, vigorous plants normally, the cucumbers. We haven't actually harvested any yet, but you can see down here we do have 2 that are coming along quite nicely. They're quite spiky to begin with, and the spikes seem to kind of disappear as they get older, but there's still a couple of spikes in them as they grow. So that's mostly it for the polytunnel, I think. In the middle here is beefsteak tomatoes. On the left is all the cherry tomatoes with a couple of beefsteaks because there wasn't enough space in the middle. Down the end here there's some more cherry tomatoes as well, underplanted with basil. The pollination doesn't seem to be too great this year. I've just been kind of shaking the stems like this. So just getting the strings and shaking them to try and get them pollinated. I might need to individually pollinate the flowers though, because it looks quite sporadic. You can see here we've got 1 tomato forming there, and the rest look pretty empty. There's 1 or 2 starting. It might just be because it's early in the year, it might be bad pollination. I'm going to try and pollinate them a bit more thoroughly, see if that helps at all. But quite often when you have the first crops of tomatoes on your plants, they do tend to be a little bit less. Until the plants really get established, they seem to be a bit slow with forming the fruits. Down the end here we've just got the 2 aubergines. They've been quite slow at growing as well. I think it's the cold. The cold nights really seem to stunt the plants, and then they don't seem to grow too well during the day. So I'm going to next year probably not bother with them, or grow them for longer inside the house, and only plant them in the polytunnel when it's really warm, say June time. Because the ones that I have in the conservatory right now are really big, and all the ones in the polytunnel, even these ones that aren't smothered, because the smothered one, that might be stunted because it's smothered, but the ones over here which aren't smothered, they're also stunted. So I think it's the cold that's really getting them. And then right at the end we've got the morning glory plants, which are flowering away nicely and put on tremendous growth as well. But I won't mention too much about these because I probably want to make a separate update about all the morning glory plants and how they've been doing. So finally I'd like to finish off here in the greenhouse. The greenhouse, as I say, is really not done as well as the polytunnel. There's been a couple of problems. I think the first problem was I mulched it too early. So I mulched it all with straw, and the ground was still a bit cold, and so that really seemed to have stunted the plants. Until we had the heat wave, they weren't really growing at all. The problem with mulching is it traps in the cold so that the sun can't heat up the soil. So early in the year, if you've got tropical plants, that can be a big issue. I mulched the polytunnel a little bit later than this, but also in the polytunnel we've got the heat recovery system where the fan blows the hot air through tubing underground. So even if the top of the ground is insulated, it's still going to be heated underneath by the tubing that I've got in there. We don't have that here in the greenhouse, so once the top's insulated, it's hard for the bottom of the ground to warm up. It does seem to have warmed up now. The chilies are looking pretty good. They're growing quite healthily now. As I say, they were really looking yellow and anemic, putting on no growth for at least a month or 2. So these haven't really grown at all since I've planted them. I'm not sure if I had them in the last update, if I planted them or not, but basically very little growth at all. Especially these sweet peppers. Since I planted them, they've pretty much sat there. It's only the last week that they've really put on any kind of growth. But we do have chilies starting to form. So I can show you here, even though they're quite small plants, you can see we've got a couple of green chilies starting there. This one's doing a bit better. It's got some slightly longer plants. There's three large chilies now starting to grow on that, so that's looking quite good. There's a little bit of weeding that needs doing in here. Every now and again we get a few weeds popping up. The most common one at the moment seems to be the barley, because I've used barley straw as a mulch. There were just a few seeds in amongst the mulch, so we've got a bit of barley coming up. I'll also need to prune the lemon verbena because that always takes off and goes crazy. And then the biggest disaster in the greenhouse is actually the aubergines here. You can see they've really not grown at all. They've almost died. And to be honest, I'm going to replace these with some courgettes I've got left over. I've got a couple of spare courgettes which have been growing really slowly because I've left them in small pots. I'm going to put them in here. I'm going to cut my losses with these aubergines because they're just not growing. And the unusual thing is, it's actually woodlice that have been eating them. I've never known woodlice to be a pest of plants. Normally they just eat dead, rotting vegetation. But I've checked in here late at night to see what was eating them, and it was actually the woodlice that was eating them. So you can see here loads of holes in the leaves, lots and lots of damage, but the worst damage is actually on the stems. So you can see here, for example, The stem there is all the outside bark's been eaten off. That's the inner wood that's exposed, so there's almost no sap coming up to the plant. The only bit of stem that's left is right underneath, so you can see there's a tiny bit of outer bark there that's attached. That's all that's providing this with any nutrients from the roots, so it's just about been eaten off and killed. And if I came here at night, this would be covered, even the leaves would be covered in wood lice that would be eating off the leaves, eating off the stems. And I hope that one might grow through it, but they've just been getting worse and the wood lice have just been feasting on them. So it's really unusual to say. I've never known wood lice to be a problem for plants. Normally they eat dead or rotting vegetation or wood. So I was quite surprised that it was wood lice eating these. Originally I thought it might have been slugs and snails, but it does appear to be wood lice. So as I say, I'll cut my losses with these, take these out, and probably put in some courgette plants. So that's all for this update, and I'll give you guys an update probably later in the year when we're starting to get some fruits harvested. Looks like we're going to get loads of courgettes, lots of cucumbers as well. The tomatoes are always a lot later, as are the peppers, but hopefully in the next update I'll have some ripening up and I can show you how good the harvest is. The only thing that might be a problem now going forward is tomato blight. We have had it quite a few times in this polytunnel. We've had it also in this greenhouse. So I'm going to be keeping an eye out for that. Once it appears, there's nothing I can really do. It will just spread throughout and cause a lot of damage. I can normally tell before it comes in the polytunnel though, because it normally affects the potatoes first, and once it's in the area it just kind of devastates anything from that family. So I'll see how it does. Normally wet summers are the biggest problem. Wet, mild weather is what really encourages them. And it's been a very dry spring and start of summer so far. This has been the first wet week that we've really had. So hopefully it keeps dry. I don't know what's forecast for the rest of the summer. Hopefully it's quite a dry summer, so we can have some more nice sunny weather, because it's the sunshine that the plants really need in the polytunnel and the greenhouse, as it's the sunshine that heats it up. Watering wise, rain makes no difference to the plants because the rain can't get in. So hopefully we'll get some warm, dry weather. That will keep any of the fungal diseases at bay, because it will keep it slightly drier in the polytunnel. We can open the door more often, let the dry air come in and dry it out a bit more. Also it keeps away the blight. So I'll give you guys an update to say, probably going to be sometime in July. Hopefully there's not much too much disease and pests, but I expect they'll start building up. The plants won't look as healthy, but we should be harvesting our first tomatoes and hopefully some chilies and peppers as well.